Good day and welcome. I'm Mike Leiderman. Our guest on this program is the man who's been called by the New York Times Israel's master poet. His name is Yehuda Amichai. Welcome. Good to have you here.
Thank you.
You are German by birth.
I was born in Germany.
And you emigrated to what is now
to
Israel,
Palestine.
Palestine then?
Which is again some of these crazy historical things. Yes.
No, I read in a biography that you had emigrated to Israel in 1936, which is pretty good since Israel wasn't created until 12 years later. But tell me, when you receive the kind of accolades you've been receiving, there was a recent article in the New York Times that talked about calling you Israel's master poet. How can you be Israel's master poet?
That's what I'm asking myself.
Come on.
Because actually, Israel's master poet was the Holy Bible, because that's where all Hebrew literature started. So I think it's a kind of, I was very happy with this article and, very complimented.
But you've been writing in Israel and Palestine for the last 50 years or so, really. You were 11.
30 years. I started actually at the age of 25.
Where do you draw from? Do you draw from, you came out of Germany, but you didn't feel the Holocaust. You got out early.
No.
You knew what was going on, but basically when you left Germany, it was not the time that a lot of other people were leaving. There wasn't that pressure.
Yes, my father had insight enough to get out.
He saw what was going to come.
And he convinced all his brothers and sisters to.
But your background was very orthodox.
Yes.
And also very modernistic in terms of Hebrew education.
Yes. So German Jews have had that kind of, you can be orthodox and you also can be a liberal, which is, in our days it sounds very crazy, but my father was like that.
Well, many German Jews also considered themselves, of course, Germans first and Jewish.
He was, also he served in the World War I in the German army, because after all, World War I was not a war of the good guys against the bad guys. It was he served there because he was a German citizen.
The point is, you were one of there weren't that many German Jews who went to what is now Palestine compared to those who went to the United States or to other countries. And of course, this has had a profound effect on you and your work the rest of your life. Could you talk about that a bit, about the effect of being in Israel and becoming an Israeli poet? What do you draw on? Do you draw on your past? Do you draw on
well, I'm doing what all poets do. I'm using my own life as a kind of, like you put a thermometer and to measure things. I think a poet is more aware of, to indicate his position in life, like a ship, constantly indicating. And because I live in a certain time and in a certain place, so all the historical events are measured by myself experiencing it. So I actually put myself in the position of measuring it. And that's, so history and political and other events just come through me.
It's all part of your work.
Yes, that's right.
But you don't consider yourself a terribly political person in Israel. You're not involved.
I think I'm even more so, because I'm not, because the so-called political poems, writing a political, almost propaganda poem for one side or for the other, and then go back to nice little things and moons and roses. I'm always involved because I live a totally normal life, and I'm part of everything happening. In the pre-state Israel, and later I took part in most of the wars and do everything. So my involvement is actually, I believe so, much deeper, because it's a natural involvement, not just for one cause and then you go back to something else.
I asked you if there was a poem we could start with and discuss a little bit, because when people read your poetry, at least when I read your poetry, it is deceptively simple. my gosh, the words are so small and economical, and then when you read it, you're saying, wait a minute, let me read this, and can we discuss this, because I felt very lost.
Well, I must add that the translators are also very good in most cases. Yes.
This is called God Has Pity on Kindergarten Children. God has pity on kindergarten children. He has less pity on school children. And on grown-ups, he has no pity at all. He leaves them alone. And sometimes they must crawl on all fours in the burning sand to reach the first aid station covered with blood. But perhaps he will watch over true lovers and have mercy on them and shelter them like a tree over the old man sleeping on a public beach. Perhaps we too will give them the last rare coins of compassion that Mother handed down to us, so that their happiness will protect us now and in other days. You read it, and you digest it, and you ingest it, and I'm saying, I don't know how to react. I really don't. Help me.
Well, it's one of my earlier poems, which I wrote after experience. My first traumatic big experience in life was war. At the age of 18, it was a time when the German army was approaching the Middle East through Africa, and so I volunteered with quite a few others to a unit of the British Army, which later became the Jewish Brigade Group. And so my first, and then I was released from that after 4 years, and then our war started very soon, in which I was wounded once, and that's probably the experience of being one of these soldiers, of young men crawling to get first aid.
On all fours.
Yes, but it's based actually on the fact that we all want to help people who are more helpless. For instance, if a very young kid cries in the street, even in the rush hour, people will ask him, "Where's your mommy?" and so on and so on. But if this kid is about 10 years old, okay. And if this kid is 15 years old, you better don't ask him, because you might get a very nasty answer. So it's a kind of order that the more helpless you are, and young children and so on, should be getting more help, whether it's God or mankind. That's another thing. But then in a war, when soldiers are supposed to be at the height of their strength, young, healthy people, and they need help even more than the smallest of children.
You put a special category of lovers, regardless of what their age. There's a special place in your heart and in your poetry for lovers.
Yes, because I think that the only countermeasure against wars is not big conferences, because they won't help, as we all know. But on a very private person, love is the only thing to put up against the war, and we know that love has no divisions and nothing.
You draw from the country of Israel, you draw from the history of Israel, you draw from the Bible.
Yes.
You draw from your own. Do you draw from much of your background as a child in Germany?
Very little, here and there, but I draw from my background in Orthodox Jewish family, from prayers and all kinds of usages in synagogue, Jewish festivals, and so on. And so
you have many quotes from the Bible or in your poetry. Pick out a couple more selections to read, would you? Let's find something.
I'll try to, because I'm not so much prepared for this. But I'll, for instance, this one is about the sad events which are happening all the time. So, just last week.
The diameter of the bomb. It sounds better if you read it. You want me to read it? You read it.
Okay, I'll read it. But it's about. It has, but the only thing is, for Americans, speaks about meters and centimeters, and I don't know whether
that's the easiest thing to understand.
That's the easiest thing. Okay. The diameter of the bomb was 30 centimeters, and the diameter of its effective range about 7 meters, with 4 dead and 11 wounded, and around these, in a larger circle of pain and time, 2 hospitals are scattered and 1 graveyard. But the young woman who was buried in the city she came from, at a distance of more than 100 kilometers, enlarges the circle considerably. and the solitary man mourning her death at the distant shores of a country far across the sea includes the entire world in the circle. And I won't even mention the crying of orphans that reaches up to the throne of God and beyond, making a circle with no end and no God.
It's about as strong as anti-war statement as you can make.
Yes, exactly. So in a way, instead of writing, this kind of.
But you don't. I mean, you aren't. You don't run for public office. You don't get on the soapbox.
No.
When you say, but you are very political in that you are constantly hammering home these themes.
Yes, but because that's the thing I feel. Poetry is a marvelous thing. It's the only way of human beings to speak, of grown-ups, to speak the real inner language, because we also use it as an outer language of communications and things like that, and there's an inner language. So actually, I believe that every person is born a poet. Only later, I think, after the age of 20, some remain poets, and most of them aren't anymore. Yes.
They grow
into harshness and so on and so on.
Yes. As a poet, which time during the 38 years Israel has been on this earth was the most, shall we say, poetic time for you? The time where the heroism or the emotions ran?
Well, actually,
is there one?
Israel there's never been one which was not. So you really can't, whether it was the War of Liberation or before, or whether it was a 67 war, the reunification of Jerusalem, or whether it was speaking about the war dead and things. There's always excitement, too much excitement. Mm-hmm. I think in Israel we have too much a share of, like the Chinese proverb, living in interesting times.
Interesting.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes.
So you never run out of material?
Oh no, I wish I would run out of it. Actually, after when the peace treaty was signed between Israel and Egypt, I was asked by an American journalist, now said you draw so much of your writing about your war experience and love against war and all these things. What will happen now if this pressure is gone? So I said, I'm prepared to give up all my poems for peace. So it's not.
But are you optimistic about peace, or do you see it as just one of your poems says that peace is the exception, of course, that war is the norm. But do you see the conflict in terms of a solution, or do you just see it in terms of constant turmoil?
No, it's a kind of. I think the main my idea is not to speak so much about peace, because peace is a very high word, and for peace you can go out to make wars. A lot of wars have been
fought in the name of peace.
In the name of peace. But if you say no war, you can't make a war in favor of no war. So we should start with very low, with no wars, and try to talk and to postpone wars as much as possible. Mm-hmm. And then after some time, peace will grow, but not to start with a big romantic idea of peace, which can be in a second overthrown.
I wonder, I suppose, here in the United States, we think in terms of, while we dislike stereotypes, we think in terms of the stereotypical Israeli as someone who has no time to sit and think about poetry, to admire poetry, someone who's always in a rush to defend himself or to go and do the next thing. And yet here you are, a poet in Israel, and one who is received very favorably. How do you reach the average Israeli?
I think that's because we are so busy, we can't just divide our time. That poetry is the only answer, because a poem is a very short, a poem is like a prayer. You can take it with you. You can keep it in your mind. You can keep a line. Without a long novel, you can't take with you, even into the war. So in a way, it's a kind of, the shortness of it makes up for the lack of time.
And it requires so much thought, in many cases more than a
It's
novel.
thought, but no, sometimes it's almost like a mantra, like a few lines at the back of your mind, which...
I found this is Songs of Jerusalem and myself, that how many books? Seven books of poetry, I believe?
I've written 9 in Hebrew, but only half of them have been translated.
Well, this one is from a few years ago,
Yes.
Songs of Jerusalem.
Yes, it's great.
And it's called All the Generations Before Me. And all the generations before me donated me bit by bit so that I'd be erected all at once here in Jerusalem, like a house of prayer or charitable institution. It binds. My name's my donor's name. It binds. I'm approaching the age of my father's death. My last will's patched with many patches. I have to change my life and death daily to fulfill all the prophecies prophesied for me, so they're not lies. It binds. I've passed 40. There are jobs I cannot get because of this. Were I in Auschwitz, they would not have sent me out to work, but gassed me straight away. It binds. I've passed 40. There are jobs I cannot get because of this. Were I in Auschwitz, they would not have sent me out to work, but are you preoccupied with aging or preoccupied with destruction?
Well, no, I take it. I never had the feelings that I had to play younger than I was or older than I was. So I take it as it is, as a fact, and I live with it. And so my poetry is, because I've written quite a lot of poetry at almost every 4 or 5 years a book, so it's a kind of, again, an indicator of what's happening to me. And poetry gives me a feeling of continuation.
What do you want the reader to gain from this, all the generations before me?
No, it's a kind of that we are not alone. We are not just say, okay, so whatever we do, there's a certain responsibility to the past in a way. As much as we can say, I don't care, I have this life, 70, 80, or how many years you have, and I don't care. But there's a certain things which obliges you to behave in a certain way, and so it's like all generations donated me. Like the Jewish people for 2,000 years in the diaspora just saved time to send a few million to Israel and have their own state. So it's a kind of like...
You were donated as well.
Yes, you were donated. So it's a kind of, it binds you. It's a kind of responsibility.
But I'm approaching the age of my father's death. Yes. I've passed 40.
Yes.
A lot of very, very heavy thoughts about aging in here. That.
Oh yes, of course there is. And,
but what you're saying is that you must keep doing. There's still time.
Yes, I keep doing, and I think you have to take it gracefully in a way. And because I have still very small children, they keep me young.
What about your family? What children?
I have a son who is 25 from my first marriage, and then I have 2 smaller children. A boy is 30 and a girl of 8. They keep me young.
Do they inspire you to write?
Oh yes, I have quite often. I without even noticing it, I use what I was saying, because children are natural poets without wanting to be. So
again, that age of innocence that unfortunately most of us outgrow.
Yes, exactly. So they're very natural in this.
Love in your poems is something very graphically described. I mean, you have. A couple of associates and I were reading them and trying to find ones we could use on the air, but you're very much enamored of love, shall we say.
There's even a book in the United States which is bilingual love poems, which has Hebrew on one side and the translation on the other.
Which is a better subject, war or love?
Well, for sure love, but in a way they come together. It's a strange, I would say, almost package deal of my life. It's almost the first love I had started with my enlisting at the age of 18 into the army. So in a way, it's a strange combination.
When you were a soldier,
yes,
and a poet at the same time, did you talk to the other troops? What kind of reception did you get? Did you work on any poetry and talk to them about it?
First of all, I started only
later,
but when I was later, after 48, I went to some reserve unit, infantry unit. Of course, sometimes people would ask me when I would go out to prepare some, let's say, some maneuver for the next day together with the other commanding people. So once I came back later and I still dotted a few things on my map for things to be done tomorrow. So I came back, so also people of my battalion said, aha, you have been writing a poem, because it was a beautiful sunset in the desert. So I lifted a piece of paper and showed them it was just very down-to-earth remarks about where Unit A should be and Unit B and so on. So it's actually, I try not to be a poet.
But there is a great deal poetic about Israel and the military and the David against Goliath.
Yeah.
Do you still find it now with Israel's a lot of the new thoughts of Israel in the world, not as the David against Goliath, but as the Goliath.
No, it's we are still. I think it's still David. I must tell you. Yes, I still don't have the feeling. It's
the image in the United States, in some circles, of course, has been changing. That Israel is looked upon as more of the westernized bully, if you will.
Yes, that's right.
But this will not.
No, I don't think it. I don't think it's that way, and I still can feel the whole impact of the last 50 years, which actually Israel went in the last 50 years through a period which in the United States would have been 200 years. And so most of the people of my age, 60 and over, are in American terms would be, and still active in schools and in government and everywhere, would be people here who had been soldiers in George Washington's army.
Sure.
So it's a kind with the same
gone
experience.
Through the whole thing, but telescoped.
Yes, exactly.
From incipient nation fighting for its independence to established nation. When you were in the 48 war.
Yes.
And what, in the 56?
Yes, 56 and 73 was my last.
And in 73 also. Yeah. Now the youngsters, the young people.
Yes.
Do they read you?
Oh yes, very much so.
The young soldiers,
amazingly.
Soldier age.
Yes.
And what kind of feedback do you get from the younger generation of Israeli today when they read your poetry?
Well, it's all over. I see it with my the selling list of my publisher. So,
really?
So I can see it. So it's really all over the place. It's Israel is a nation of where poetry is much more written and read and bought and looked upon as something which you have ministers and cabinet ministers and generals who pride themselves that they know a poet, which would be unheard of in this country.
Again, tracing back to what? To the poetry of, or the pressure that the people are under?
I think that's right. The pressure, and also because Hebrew is an old, new language, I think there was an unbroken tradition of Hebrew poetry from the time of the Bible through the Middle Ages, where they wrote prayers, which are poems, till our present day. So it's actually, we just are continuing what has been said.
I guess this, we started out discussing this at the beginning of the program about it seemed that Israel did not have time for poetry, and yet Israelis have more time for poetry. Pick another selection, would you? And let's.
Yes. So listen, if it's about the thing of time, so I'll if you feel like, which I feel it's the very core of the feeling of history in Israel.
It's called A Man Doesn't Have Time. A man doesn't have time for everything. He doesn't have seasons enough to have a season for every purpose. Ecclesiastes was wrong about that. A man needs to love and to hate at the same moment, to laugh and cry with the same eyes, with the same hands to cast away stones, to gather them, to make love in war and war in love, and to hate and forgive and remember and forget, to set in order and confuse, to eat and to digest what history takes years and years to do. A man doesn't have time. When he loses, he seeks. When he finds, he forgets. When he forgets, he loves. When he loves, he begins to forget. And his soul is experienced. His soul is very professional. Only his body remains forever an amateur. It tries and it misses, gets muddled, doesn't learn a thing, drunk and blind in its pleasures and in its pains. He will die as figs die in autumn, shriveled and full of himself, and sweet, the leaves growing dry on the ground. The bare branch is already pointing to the place where there's time for everything. Beautiful, beautiful. It takes, and again, another example of you taking a biblical theme and...
yes. Well, it's almost comes very natural, like here, it's a kind of reaction towards
the play off
Ecclesiastes, yes.
You also write some novels, some plays, some short stories.
Yes.
These are what, diversions? I mean, they take you away from
yes, they take me. Sometimes I had a feeling to write more about that, but basically I see myself as being a poet mainly, which means to write very concentratedly on.
And what about the younger generation? You teach also.
Yes.
What's the caliber of your students?
I went on early retirement a few years ago, but yes, in Israel poetry is very much, it's even taught in schools, and actually in high school.
So we will be having a good future generation of Israeli poets?
Yes, I don't know, I hope so. Well, here, this one is on, we were speaking about peace. You know, it's a famous, this is based on this famous peace prophecy of grinding swords into plowshares and so.
You know what? In the short time we have left, I don't mean to interrupt. Could you read one poem in Hebrew, a short one?
In Hebrew, okay.
Yeah, and then discuss it a little bit.
Okay, but I have to read something which has been. Yes, okay. I'll read this one. I'll read it first in translation, perhaps.
Okay.
Or could you read it in translation?
I'll read it in translation. You read it in Hebrew.
It's a very short one.
When I banged my head on the door, I screamed, my head, and I screamed, door, door. And I didn't scream mama, and I didn't scream God, and I didn't prophesy a word at the end of days where there will be no more heads and doors. When you stroked my head, I whispered, my head, I whispered, your hand, and I didn't whisper mama or God. And I didn't have miraculous visions of hands stroking heads in the heavens as they split wide open. Whatever I scream or say or whisper is only to console myself. My head, door, door, your hand,
Yes, now in Hebrew. כשנחבט ראשי בדלת צעקתי ראשי ראשי וצעקתי דלת דלת ולא צעקתי אמא ולא אלוהים ולא אמרתי חזון אחרית ימים על עולם שבו לא יהיו עוד ראשים ודלתות. כשליטפת את ראשי לחשתי ראשי ראשי ולחשתי ידך ידך ולא לחשתי אמא ולא אלוהים ולא ראיתי מראות מופלאים של ידיים מלטפות ראשים בשמיים הנפתחים. כל שאני צועק ואומר ולוחש הוא לנחם את עצמי, ראשי, ראשי, דלת, דלת, ידך, ידך.
The message that we have to deal with what is and deal with the immediate. And
Exactly.
Yeah. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you.
Yehuda Amichai, our guest, the man called the Master Poet of Israel, and I hope this time we have seen why. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mike Leiderman. We'll see you next time.
Shalom. Tova uvracha, chen v'chesed v'rachamim. Sim shalom. Tova uvracha, chen v'chesed v'rachamim. Aleinu, aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael.